So we're now going to shift and talk about China. And I think the comment was made earlier that China has gone farther than Brazil. And so I think we'll hear whether that's the case. My own sense is that China has technologically very advanced in many areas, and there are pieces of a regulatory framework. But IoT continues to evolve, as we've heard earlier. So what I heard coming out of the Brazilian experts is that there's an effort to create some kind of comprehensive framework around a current perception of what IoT is. And I'm very curious as we go into this discussion. I think we'll see some very advanced use cases. I think we're going to see, some very important priorities articulated in the national plan. I don't know if we'll see a kind of comprehensive regulatory frameworks, but maybe we will. That's the question, one of the questions I have as we go into this discussion. We have two people just who are extraordinarily expert, who are able to speak with us today. You've already been introduced to Professor Benjamin Koo, so I won't reiterate what you heard earlier, except just to note that in addition to his work at the iCenter, he really is thinking and writing about knowledge management in general, and this is one form it's taking. He is an engineer, as he said, an MIT-trained PhD, as well as an industrial and mechanical engineering from the University of Minnesota. So he's been driving change, from a technologist perspective. And we're also really fortunate to have with us Jonathan Wurtzel, senior partner of McKinsey and a director of the McKinsey Global Institute in China. I've had the pleasure of knowing Jonathan Wurtzel now for quite a few years, and I know that he really has been instrumental, key person in building McKinsey's China office and operations. He works, of course, with numerous Chinese, other Asian, and foreign firms in China, and he's also played a very catalytic role around cities in China. He leads what's now called McKinsey's Cities Special Initiative, working with cities and regions really all over the world. But I think Jonathan deserves special recognition for working with so many Chinese cities and developing collaborations with research centers, including Columbia University, and local institutions, and coming up with ideas that would have transformative impact in cities, and then rolling those out and doing test cases. So very extraordinary. He's written 5 books on China. That is remarkable. At Columbia, we consider that very productive, and with a very that have done extremely well. His books, and he's also part of a director of the McKinsey Global Institute, which is, as we know, very important think tank that is producing really cutting-edge research on fundamental global issues facing the world. So I think I'm looking for Professor Koo, who I'm wondering if he has stepped out for a moment. But with that, let me invite Jonathan to get us started.
So, wonderful meeting, Dean General. I mean, really, very, very good to have this kind of an exchange. It sort of puts real meaning to the whole South-South cooperation kind of idea, and shows that it is actually a global collaboration. So, I mean, I'm really appreciative of the chance to be here and to introduce a few views from MGI. I have four comments. Basically, just to give a few facts around China. and it's the digital economy. There's a lot of hype. We'll just give a few facts. Then Chinese regulation and what its role has been, and I would argue that it's a relatively light touch. Some people might say late touch approach to it all. But there certainly is areas where it's been heavier than others. I think importantly, the future is likely to be somewhat different because the pace and the scale and the implications of the disruption of IoT and more broadly of AI are going to be that much bigger for business and society, and as a result may require some speedier responses. The Chinese government has not been slow in the cases of things that it views as destabilizing, notably the ban on ICOs, for example. And finally, I think that there are some opportunities for collaboration. I'd be interested to have that conversation here to see whether we could walk away with a few ideas for us to work together, for China and Brazil to work together. So, but without any doubt, I wanted to start with this because, it's my one economist chart, and I have to confess I am not an economist, but I will say that, this is actually drawn from Li Keqiang and Xi Jinping's speeches. That those two are, for my money, the only politicians that I know of in the global stage who use the words total factor productivity in their speeches. So they don't need to be educated about that. And I think that it's actually quite true of the broader ranks of the Chinese government. They kind of get the point that if China is going to get rich, it has to get productive or get smart. There are not going to be any more new Chinese. They're done. China passed its Lewis turning point a couple of years ago. The working age population is flat to declining. If China is going to be rich, every average Chinese has to be more productive. As a result, this is underlying the entire way of thinking about technology and innovation, that this is a critical national security goal, that either China achieves productivity comparable to or greater than global leadership, or it's not going to achieve the historic mission of national rejuvenation, which is the way Xi Jinping would put it, about returning China to its rightful place as the central kingdom, which is, in other words, the biggest economy in the world with the most technology and the most resources and the most opportunity. So to achieve this goal, China essentially has to see, because fixed capital inputs are declining, as savings rate gradually decline, and as I-Core goes up, therefore you get much less bang for your buck from the fixed capital line, therefore productivity becomes the difference. And actually 40 or 50% of GDP growth of productivity is a relatively conservative target. As we think about global GDP growth, that number in OECD countries is typically closer to 60 or 70. And finally, if we want to believe how are we going to get all that productivity, 60 or 70 of that's going to come out of AI. So that there is some residual long tail industry consolidation opportunities for China. Certainly management is poor in a lot of places. But as we think about how those problems are going to be resolved, how is China going to become more energy efficient? How is China become more productive in its workforce? It's going to be through the deployment of digital technologies. So this is a critical national security goal, and that's my one Chinese economist chart. So with that, yay, China's digital economy, what an awesome thing. So China went from 0% retail e-commerce to 40% of the world's e-commerce transaction value. And it's the largest e-commerce market in the world, 11 times the mobile payments of the United States, and 1/3 of the global unicorns, companies with a market value of over $1 billion. And the tech is there. So, China's payment systems are, 4 to 5 times at this point faster than U.S. payment systems. China has the world record in computing power. In order to deal with problems of scale, China's had to evolve technological solutions to address those things. So it's real tech in a real marketplace. And it's not just BAT. BAT, of course, is big. Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. But here are landscape 50+ China unicorns. So it's a very broad panoply of companies. And this is how you get used. So Chinese payments. So in the United States, if you want to bring your small and medium-sized shop online, you have to go out and buy an NFC reader or something like that, and you have to hook up. It costs you maybe $500, $600. In China, you take a piece of paper, you print out a QR code, and you stick it on the window. You are now digitally enabled. Because WeChat is instant, it's free, it's micro. So you see street beggars on the side there. The guy has a QR code, so you can scan it and give him money. Doormen at hotel rooms will show a QR code on the back of their hand in case you want to scan them and give them money. So and I don't know why people in OECD countries like to pay 3% transaction costs, but okay, up to you. In China, it's 0. and it's instantaneous, and it's a micro. So that's one application. This is Hema. This is Alibaba's new retail. It says what their whole point, the government came to Alibaba and said, hey, you guys, you say you're doing all this great stuff for the retail segment, but every time you open up a little bit more to retail, we bankrupt another bunch of supermarkets. So how many jobs are you actually really creating? So they went back and they rethought the idea and said, okay, we're not about direct to consumer, which would be JD. We're about enabling the retailer. So we're bringing the retailer online to cloud service. So here we create this model where anybody who is a small retailer can join our platform. We want the data. What they get is the ability to customize the experience to anybody within a half-kilometer radius of the supermarket, proven to boost revenues by 30 or 40% for any shop that participates. You get online ordering, offline delivery. This guy is sort of scanning from the online order into that little bag. It goes up to the top. It ships around to a motorcycle. Goes out to the customer at home, and then you get to, of course, customize the assortment. So you reduce a lot of your waste and inventory. Costs go down. Revenues go up. It really works. That's why this stuff is out there. It actually works. Mobike, we've opened up last mile in China, so basically you have millions of people who are now, scanning their QR codes and, riding bikes all across the cities. That basically boosted physical activity probably by about 15 or 20% just across the population that uses the bikes. It's better, it's healthier, and again, it solves last mile between subway stations and home. Healthcare, this is a company called Infravision, which uses AI to scan for lesions. So if you're the doctor in a tertiary hospital in China at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you've been working for 10 hours a day, you're a little bit tired, the AI will help you. And it's proven to show up 30% more of the lesions that would have been missed before, and particularly complicated kinds of cancers. So this is, again, it's not replacing humans in this case, it's augmenting the capacity of the doctor. And finally, dealing with more mundane problems, such as the toilet paper situation in the Temple of Heaven, where you had multiple people coming into, taking all of the toilet paper. So here the solution is, because you have this massive onslaught of humanity, we employ facial recognition, so that when Mr. Joe shows up, he can, put his face in the mirror, and they say, okay, here, take your toilet paper, but if you come back within 10 more minutes, no more toilet paper for you. So it's, it's a supply management tool. And of course, the problem is, what if I have diarrhea? Well, okay, fine. Then we have an attendant somewhere, but it does actually allow us to provide a better service for more people. And maybe that's the positive face of the social control. Here's the other side of it. This is when you're jaywalking in Shenzhen. This is what will flash up on the screen. It's your name, your picture, and why you should be shamed into no longer crossing the street, and possibly will be hooked to your Sesame credit score in the future, and we'll find out. But so that AI is a dramatic set of technology changes, but it's also queuing into social changes, and is queuing into economic changes. So it doesn't just change our tech, it changes our life. I'll just close with saying, yep, yeah.
It's not only facial recognition. They now recognize if you are saying the truth or lying, or you are feeling a bit something.
Lots of stuff is coming up. I mean, people are showing up at public events and realizing that there's a warrant outstanding for them, and they got picked out of a crowd of 50,000 people. It's like, wow, I didn't think that it was going to happen. This is, I'm going to try to close off quickly, but just to say this, the second big point is that, this was a fundamentally market-driven event. Nobody predicted Alibaba. Nobody predicted Tencent. There wasn't anything in the plan about facial recognition on jaywalking. There were projects, I should say that, in the Golden Shield and Golden Port. So these were all proved to initiate. The government did projects to initiate to show it was possible to do something. So we used to have 909 projects in China, which were basically, China can make a semiconductor factory, or China can do biotech, or China can build a supercomputer. But there was sort of like proof of concept ideas, and then zoom, just let the market run with it. So this is being driven by 700 million internet users. It's being driven by all these big companies, and it's being driven by a regulatory approach that essentially allows innovators room to experiment. This just says that it took 11 years before the Chinese government said that Alibaba was a bank. And it's mostly because the banks were starting to complain about Alibaba. And so, you really should regulate them. And said, okay, fine. we think that, there is space for the regulator to do more. I mean, clearly, these are the 5 areas where we think regulatory engagement makes a lot of sense. It's around the technology, making sure that we've got some of it, and so essentially a supply side concern. It's around interoperability and standardization of the stack so that we can work across it. Clearly, there's an IP security and privacy conversation, data security and trust, and we've talked about that. There's equally important a business culture and organization issue, sort of like how are we actually thinking about the impacts of this on unions, on workers, of course, on companies as they exist today. And finally, there's a public policy issue, which is more about the broader impacts on the consumer. And these are all areas where China is sort of figuring out its own way. It's spent a lot of time pretty much on the first topic, and so that's what Made in China 2025 is all about, essentially, is saying so that's the Babe Ruth moment, and if you use the baseball analogy, you said China is calling its shots, so, going to go there. It's going to be 90% Chinese sensors, 30%, well, actually I have this, domestic market share goals for all of this stuff, which is going to be, this is made in China. So, there's been a lot of focus on how are we going to build our domestic industry, including, specific targets around accuracy of Chinese English translation and operating costs. These are all part of MII's goals. And money has followed, so lots of money. Local governments are doing this. Probably more of the money has come local government than national government. And then law. So I was just reading about, China is developing its own sort of approaches to operations, data security, data storage. It's somewhat challenging to do a comparison between Chinese law and Western law because literally specifications mean different things. And so like in standard doesn't mean the same thing in Chinese as it does in English. It's more policy guidelines, and implementation is generally speaking left up to the administrator in charge, or when you come to the court. If you do, it's up to the court. It's much more a rule of precedent than it is a rule of law, and that reflects the fact that as of 30 years ago, China didn't have any law, didn't have any lawyers, and nothing. So this is all built on a pay-as-you-go kind of basis, which I think creates again a lot of flexibility and a relative light or late touch. However, a lot of uncertainty as well. Am I doing something that's legal or not? Don't know. We'll find out. Do I want to comply? Yes. So that's typically the commercial conversation. So, and I think that I will call it there because I'm conscious of time. I'll just close with 2 more things. One is the future is going to be a lot more interesting in a sense, as the Chinese would say, so both opportunities and challenges. So we think about automation, we think China's kind of right smack in the middle of who's going to get disrupted, right along with Brazil. This chart shows GDP per capita versus current work activities that are displaced by automation. So we think in a 15-year time frame, probably 15-20% of Chinese work activities will be displaced. That doesn't mean 15% of the jobs, that means 15 to 20% of everybody's work activities. So it's not confined to one segment of the population, it's everybody. And of course, when this tends to flip a switch, and so actually you could argue that job dislocation is actually a lot bigger than the 15 to 20% because the job changes. And may or may not be good for that job. So Brazil and China, quite in the same place here in terms of its impact. Arguably the OECD will probably get hit a little bit harder and faster because of this essentially wage-driven. Nonetheless, there's going to be, if you took it absolute numbers, China will have the single largest amount of displaced workers on the planet. Several hundred million people are going to have to find new jobs. Going to look at that and say, well, we just did that. 30 years of dislocation from farm to factory. So, okay, do it again. But no, it's actually kind of different because we're not talking about young people. We're talking about middle-aged people. We're not talking about ag to industry. We're talking about industry to digital. It's a whole new skill set. So I think this is going to be, a great laboratory for learning, if you will, in the positive sense. But we're going to have to go through it. Which leads me to the last point, which is essentially, government's got that role, is that, I do think that there is an opportunity for China and Brazil to have this conversation. We see the face of globalization going forward to be a digital face. And we think global trade in goods and services has plateaued for the last couple of years. Maybe go up a little bit more, but what's exploded, which doesn't get captured, is data-driven trade. The cross-border data flows are up by trillions of dollars over the last couple of years. Bandwidth has exploded about 35 times over the last decade if you look at cross-border bandwidth. So the face of globalization now is your radiologist in Manaus treating a housewife in Shanghai. And so there's, that's why Jack can go to the floor of Trump Tower and says, I can employ 1 million US people on the electronic world trade platform at zero marginal cost. So why don't you want that? I think this is the challenge for business, for government, for all of us to say, wow, how can we embrace this global age, digital age, and make it work for us? And this is not an academic question, if you will. I mean, there is an academic component to it, of course, but there is a real-world practical answer of how do we spur cross-border data flows to make them work for us, support digital investment, and enable the technologies that can ultimately turn into better healthcare, better retail, better mobility, and better security for everybody. So that would be a great conversation to have, and we're there.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. I had not seen before a panhandler with a QR code. That was really, I think, symbolic of the profundity of the change. I think we're very fortunate to have Professor Ku, who will speak more from a technology perspective, and I think he also has some PowerPoints, so thank you for preparing those. And you're not even a McKinsey partner, so you see, all of us now use PowerPoints, even academicians. Thank you, Professor.
Yes. Welcome. So, this picture actually took me literally hours to decide whether I want to show it to you or not, because the original statement was, "What would China's IoT plan looks like?" This is China's IoT plan would look like. There's only one belief system in China that would believe that human and the heaven or the physical world are united. Therefore, one person must somehow manage to basically become utilizing the qi, so-called. So that's ultimately the IoT for Chinese. But I picked this picture. As you can tell, this guy has bigger nose, right? We call anybody who doesn't look Chinese are so-called the big nose people, right? This guy has bigger nose than me. As you can see, 90% of people have my nose instead of that nose. And it turns out I want to say something that's really what we hope, because the previous session was what would China's IoT plan look like. But this session is actually about design and outcome. And this actually is the design and outcome, meaning that if we were able to make Chinese culture a part of heaven and human united together, have international people or big-nose people also believe and practice the same thing we do, that would be the proper design and outcome of this so-called internationalization of such a plan. And then today, I actually was honored to have this culture shock to come back to New York. I almost come to New York every 6 months. And I lived here in US for about 16 years. But today I had another dose of culture shock, and also showed me that I preemptively knew I should pick this picture. I was standing over there, and Dean asked me, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about China's IoT plan. And Jonathan came over to me. He didn't say anything to me. He said in Chinese, are you Shanghainese? I said, how do you know? And that's pretty spooky, right? And then he started telling me all this important technocrats that he knows in China. And he started speaking Chinese to me. And he actually spoke more fluent Chinese than I did. So if you challenge him, he probably can do this Tai Chi master thing to you in no time. I'm serious in the following sense, that the whole idea of IoT is really not about just technology. Because ultimately, as we just saw, if the panhandler could use QR code and literally open up global account, because any of these big-nose people could have paid him, right, with real money, and the focus is not the technology. Technology must be so invisible that anybody can use it all the time, everywhere. And that's really China's real global plan for making it happen. Okay, so now I just said the thing I may not have the right to say because I am not an international policy scholar. However, I do have the authority to give you this slide. I was very careful in precisely only giving you the proper information. Now, this is actually from Wikipedia, so even if it were wrong to be wrong, it has to be precise. So all the numbers are exactly right, okay? So China has this so-called 13th plan, and all my salary, all my grants, if there were any, all came from here, right? If you do not follow this schedule, you won't get a penny, right? So roughly speaking, these are the key points I picked out from Wikipedia on the most important point for that one 5-year cycle. So let's skip 1996 to 2000 cycle because it's just ancient. In our days, IoT was not even properly set back then. And more important, back then I was not there in China. So the following 5-year, the 10th plan from 2001 to 2005, there's only one and most important statement for the whole government. That is to keep the GDP up. Whether it is exactly 7 or 8, it doesn't really matter. But it's basically keep the growth up so that we have basically enough momentum to keep the economy and all these expenses growing. I don't have the McKinsey kind of infographic, okay? But you see the 7%, right? Then the next 5 years is about smart city and urbanization. Why? Why smart city? Why urbanization? The whole idea is that they not only that, they actually want, as you can see, the following 5 years, they want urbanization to reach 51% of the entire population. Prior to this, there were literally 80%, not exactly this 2006, but there were literally 80 to 90% of people in China, they were categorized as so-called farmers. In China, farmer is not necessarily a skill, a profession. It's literally, in my opinion, at least in colloquial language, and if you don't believe me, you can ask Jonathan. Jonathan speaks Chinese better than me. That a farmer actually implied you are different castes, you are different class of people. So by moving at least 50% of people into urbanized people, meaning you have civilized them. So now, after this 12-year plan, now we are getting into the 13th plan, is about greener China, right? You just recently heard President Xi Jinping wanting to have greener China that's not talk about only GDP. He even officially said that, right? So look at this roughly 10, 15 years of time, the entire ideology changed. So the use of IoT technology will profoundly change because that from GDP as a number, as an abstract number, so people can report up, so we can apply for grants. Now we are actually talking about how can we make every atom in the atmosphere actually could become worthwhile for breathing, for happiness, etc. How does this transformation happen on a massive number of people within 5-year time plan? So let me reveal the truth. Okay, let me show my, Tsinghua level of infographics. Actually, I use beautiful AI, just tell you, okay? I didn't do it. I just used AI to help me. So AI helped me create this. So there's additional points on this diagram says, in Alipay, 2004, it created digital cash services. So today, if I don't remember it wrong, is 2018, 14 years later. You know who is the dominant player in the marketplace? Oh, by the way, I don't own any stock in Tencent whatsoever, okay? It's WeChat. It's 80 to 20, according to some of the, I shouldn't say internal people, some people told me, obviously I don't know for sure, and I shouldn't know, okay? So as you can see in this diagram, when was WeChat Pay introduced? 2014, 10 years later. And 2014 was only 4 years ago. That actually meant within 4 years' time, WeChat overcome the entire Alipay infrastructure. And Alipay is almost as big as eBay, as Amazon, in the sense that they are the internet of everything. And then how could somebody else come in and took his lunch? And even Jack Ma personally said the following statement. Physically standing next to Pony Ma, the CEO of Tencent, he said, maybe WeChat Pay shouldn't only belong to Tencent. So what does that mean? I mean, he himself had Alipay. How would he even bother in front of Ponima said, you should not only solely own this entire payment space. Okay, the idea is very simple. We have been tokenized. Human has become an IoT carrier. So I think let's try to make the whole thing very, very visible. Every time I go home, my young son, 6-year-old, will very happily jump to me, "Oh, Daddy's home." But I am smarter than that. I know what he meant. He really meant, "Oh, Daddy's iPhone is home." He doesn't care about me as much as he wants to play my iPhone. Obviously, the fact is that the iPhone never really got played by him. The iPhone knows so much more about him, so the iPhone is playing him. IoT, Internet of Things technology, has become so pervasive that if you really build social app along with all these functionalities, including payment, you are completely engulfing the livelihood of the entire civilization. Okay. So now look at Bitcoin in 2008. It was an idea, and back then, and you must sigh after I say this, you literally can buy 1 Bitcoin for less than 1 cent. Imagine how rich you will be right now. Just do the imagination for now, and you'll be all happy, right? But obviously, that money did not really get to become 20,000 per coin up until last year. And it crashed again, but it's still about 5,000, 6,000, I don't know, right? But still, it's easily let's say, a 1,000,000-time increase over time in 10 years. In any economy, if you had a 1,000,000-time depreciation of any currency globally, you will see disaster. But we didn't. Why? Why? Recently, I have one economist says this to me. I was so deeply impressed. She said the following. She said, "Ben, I finally realized it was not the Bitcoin going up and down and changing and high volatility. Bitcoin never changed. It's the economy around us changing, and Bitcoin reflects the change." Right? Bitcoin has a total of fixed amount, 21 million, but nobody knows how many exact US dollars are out there. Maybe you New Yorkers know, right? But I don't. And nobody knows how many Brazilian dollars are out there. Nobody knows exactly how many Chinese yuan are out there. But we can all check instantaneously to know the total amount of Bitcoin that is out there. So is any other so-called cryptocurrency. And more importantly, recently, I just saw somebody was able to hack some currency so that somebody was overprinting that currency. So that is actually a news. If any other government overprinted its own currency, would that be a news? Would they tell you? So the focus is following. We are all living under a profound paradigm shift. We have to look at the whole world profoundly in a totally different way. So the dean just says I should go quick. So let me go quick. So I have 1 more minute. On the other hand, to really lift to the next generation, we need a totally different way to look at the world. We have to have a completely different cognitive foundation. That is not just about gadgets, but also about the way we think. That's why in the middle, I call this temporarily, without better words, computational thinking. But by the way, computational thinking is very Chinese. You remember, back then, we invented the real random numbers, right? The oracle. And by the way, the guy who linked energy, the smallest amount of energy, to cryptography as the way to measure the amount of computing power required to do mining, for example, and was cited by Satoshi Nakamoto's original paper on the second degree of separation. He's the Turing Award winner, Andrew Yao, who is a professor now at Tsinghua University. So on top, it's not about anybody who learns to become a shaman or becomes a medical doctor. You have to be able to speak the language like our previous speaker was able to talk about the entire industrial structure. And then at the foundational layer, you must be able to talk about domain-specific skills. And everyone, that's the point, has to learn all three things, from meso to micro to micro. And everybody must go through the same kind of curriculum. So this is my experiment for the next 3 years. The Minister of Education asked me to do in China. So I'm trying this first to my own children and also to my students at Tsinghua University. Oh, by the way, I don't send my children to school. Obviously, I'm in school as a teacher, so I teach my students this way. And then I hope that we can use this as a generic framework, so allow people to have a very open-minded capability to do domain-specific skills, and also have the ability to see things in macroscopic way, and having the computational thinking as a way to see the world differently. That's my way of seeing Internet of Everything. Thank you.
Wonderful, fascinating remarks by both of you. Thank you. Please join me for a few minutes before we break. So many interesting things were said, it's hard to know where to land. But, you know, I guess one place I'd just like us to help orient us is, you know, Jonathan, you said that China is so committed to raising productivity that digital is a fundamental driver of raising productivity. So whatever is needed to achieve that, whether it's AI or other instruments, and thus by implication, the interconnection of things, which is part of, you know, which is really what I think of when I think of the Internet of Things. You know, you need the foundational features, such as digital, but then you need to use that to build that interconnected world. And interestingly, neither of you are really making a distinction between the sort of cyber-physical systems, the machine-to-machine, and the digital foundation. And I just wonder, do you think of IoT frameworks as just fully integrated, or is there a distinction between the digital and the IoT universe in the China? Because neither of you made that distinction.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really interesting question. I initially thought it was about digital versus physical, but if it's digital versus IoT, or how IoT fits into digital, I think IoT is a component of a broader set of digital technologies. So, and I mean, we would have a quite specific definition about IoT, in a sense, having at least three components to it: a sensor, an analytical engine, and a decision-making apparatus. And you know, that constitutes an IoT system. Whereas digital could be potentially broader than that and might not have a decision-making component to it. You know, so I think the IoT and aspect of this, though, is very much linked to the physical, in the sense that it has to actually influence the physical world in some way. And I think that would be a pretty critical part of the definition. And from that point of view, I think it's an overlay on the physical world, and the reality being that China today invests more in infrastructure than the United States and Western Europe combined on an annual basis, and so the growth of that physical infrastructure is just much greater, and as a result, the opportunity to introduce new intelligence into the system is that much higher. As a result, you see it much quicker the intelligence in the actual physical thing. I hope that's getting close to.
That's very helpful. And Ben, do you see a distinction, or do you see it in the Chinese context as a fully integrated conversation?
Yes, I would consider it as a fully integrated consideration for the following reason. One of the key things about IoT in general is that it allows people to address anything with a short number. And the number is supposedly roughly 2 to the 256 power, or 256 bit, which is literally, if you write it down in hexadecimal numbers, it's a short string. Machine can check it really quick, and human can literally write it down, right? And that usually supposedly covers all of the atoms in the universe and multiplied by 1,000,000 times. You still cannot exhaust it. And that generic idea was really a different way of seeing language. Meaning that how do you consciously relate a symbol with many, many possibility or specific devices? That idea completely changes the way we deal with everyday identifiable and uniquely addressable thing. That literally sounds like a spell, like a, how do you say, abracadabra, right? And literally, if you read those numbers, it will sound exactly, am I allowed to say this? So the fact is that computer is speaking that language. Because the computer is speaking a language, and unless we were able to allow people to see the simple mathematical secret or mathematical mechanism, that we couldn't possibly really educate people to see things differently than they were born to be trained as a regular human, because this is a part of our civilization. On the other hand, as an educator, as an IoT architect, the only way to really see the whole world in so-called egalitarianly, allowing anybody to see this simple idea that we must integrate this not only on the technical level, but also on the philosophical level, and get them to understand it from the get-go.
So let me move you for a moment before opening this up, and we will open it up into a little bit more controversial territory, which is, China has these tremendous capabilities, incredibly talented people, obviously innovative firms. Jonathan has emphasized light regulatory framework, a policy environment that has emphasized the importance of this area, thrown money at it. Required data to be localized, right? Limited those who have access to that data. Collected it, the state itself. So how much of that requires, of those elements, I think, are really nationalistic in character, that do not leave space for foreign market participants or technology? Or are there areas that really would thrive only if it's an open architecture?
Well, I think it's first of all, it's really a work in progress here. I was just reading the latest from CSIS, and that their view would be that China is evolving a data security regime which is closer to GDPRS than it is to US and the APEC, but it's supposed to be less rigid in their view than GDPRS, and allow more room for consent, sort of implied consent as opposed to explicitly given consent, and so forth. Gets very technical. But the other point they highlight, of course, is this issue that standards in China are not the same thing as standards everywhere else. They're not actually technical standards. They're, again, more policy implementation guidelines. And guidelines is something that, it leaves the regime plenty of room to say, well, maybe we didn't want to do it that way. It creates all this uncertainty, which is, I think, the sticking point in all these negotiations, in that, we try to tie somebody down to an explicit thing, and you sort of say, well, you're not going to be able to prove the negative. You're not going to be able to say it's impossible for me to do that. It might at some point be possible to do it. So that's the source of much frustration, I think, in international consensus, building international consensus. As to the basic principle, of course, that, in technology and flows and data flows are good things, I think everybody gets that in China. And I think they always balance that against the potential that those flows bring for instability. So the number one job for the Chinese government is to preserve the stability of the Chinese people and assure the continued harmonious and development of the society. That's the way they would phrase it. And so, of course, anything that promotes instability is going to be viewed as something to be quite quite cautious about. And as a result, I said the ICO banning earlier this year or last year was a good example of saying, okay, really don't think that we should allow people to imagine that there's a sovereign credit behind Bitcoin. There isn't, and there won't be, and anybody who's selling that on that basis is taking advantage of the good faith and credit of the Chinese people, and we will not allow that. And so that became a very clear and fast response. So, I'm sure that there are opportunities for improvement in the way the Chinese government handles these things, and I think they would say as much. So that this type of panel is happening pretty much every day at the Ministry of Information in China, and so that there are plenty of foreign experts who are coming over and providing their input. I would say a far greater number of U.S. academics and politicians are in China advising the Chinese government than there are Chinese academicians and politicians advising the U.S. government. And I think perhaps both sides could learn from something from each other.
Thank you. Do you have a comment?
Yes. When I was a PhD student here, I tried to study the science of system architecting, meaning that how can you make system-level decisions with technical precision or some kind of scientific approach. But it turns out that it was believed architecting is a form of art, or making law and policy is a form of art, because it has so many layers, it requires a lot of discourse, a lot of discussion. However, as we recently noticed on the field of so-called private currency or so-called cryptocurrency, that is creating so much unique kind of approaches to address data, to address privacy, that became a technical question rather than purely an art. So source code can be written and discussed, and knowing which line was wrong, therefore caused a total breakdown of that system. So it was actually considered not possible just merely 10, 20 years ago when we were computer scientists trying to solve a technical problem. So therefore, a similar thing applies to Chinese architecture, both in IoT and also in policymaking. So now, for any government who cares to know stability as important as Jonathan just said, so he really is my Chinese teacher, so I should learn more from him, that the government would love to know how and what kind of technical skill and tools is available for them so they can always tweak the knob and precisely know how to keep the system stable. But what would that be? As you know, recently we adjusted the notion of constitution, right, for different kind of policies, etc. And that's actually a sign that we recognize there's a constitution to be changed. And think about this. The Chinese people do not talk about Chinese constitutions all the time. Not in the past, right? Until recently, this became, oh, by the way, President Xi Jinping was the proud product of Tsinghua's law school, okay? So put it simply, they are technical things to be understood. They are code to be written. And there are ways that we believe that we can eventually incorporate precise scientific discourse with proper scientific policy making along with the super complex system.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic ideas on the table before us. I could keep going with many more, but I'd like to at least collect a couple of questions, if I may, and then let our speakers offer a few thoughts. Give the microphone to Thomas Lind, who I must say deserves enormous credit for organizing, working on this with Ronaldo today, and thank you. Thomas.
Thank you, Dean. My question is around cybersecurity. First off, thank you both for two fantastic presentations, very informative. But both of you touched on issues that, frankly, from a cybersecurity perspective, I find concerning, to say the least. Jonathan, you said, in terms of China's focus on raising productivity, a lot of the focus was on cheaply manufactured devices with high connectivity that were easily meshable across different industries, and I assume from an ICT standpoint across different industries and sectors. And Professor Ku or Ben, you said a wonderful line about how IoT means that the internet should be universally accessible and, in a sense, almost invisible in people's daily lives, which to me, from a practical standpoint, again, sounds like cheap and universal. And if China's policy, whether implicit or explicit, is to focus on that, then there's a clear clash with US policy, which is developing towards greater regulation, especially around industrial or critical infrastructure. And so I wonder, A, is there an awareness of the kinds of vulnerabilities that, proliferate under those conditions? And B, are we therefore moving towards a kind of balkanization of the internet, which I know is a kind of hot topic phrase at the moment, but is genuinely frightening if that's for real. So,
Okay, I'll take on that first. I am definitely feel this threat of consumerism and commercialization that enters every single level. It is, in my opinion, put it simply and subjectively, it is bad. But knowing it is so bad, that is everywhere already. So we have to make bad into some kind of good. So specifically, the way I might think about it, and this is roughly my proposition, is instead of thinking IoT individually as an individual technology, it actually could be reversely considered as if every device, every consumerism, as if there were some kind of Maxwell's demon, as my colleague here that would love to, Mr. Han Feng is here, Maxwell demon physicist, and or the so-called demons or the Yao Guai. So you know what's Yao Guai? That the demons that actually trick you to do things that's bad. And it is a way to test you how you can become good. And you want to allocate your time and space according to the proper action. So that becomes a different way of becoming a person that tries to cleanse your soul. On the other hand, you have to have this so-called computational or physicist kind of thinking to see the universe with its minutest possible details of opportunity to become a better person. So you have to control your will not to be enticed by these bad demons. So on the other hand, if you don't have this structure, I understand is addressing a power, this computational possibilities, of course you're always going to be tricked. So that's why so-called education is so profound. And more importantly, it's really not about which government gives more or less money to a particular program. Unfortunately, in my opinion, most of the programs themselves are just not giving people enough condensation and proper structure to have the technical understanding of the secret of the universe. Therefore, we wasted too much time to know things that's irrelevant, so we could not see the truth. That's why.
I'm not going to be able to scale to that level of metaphysical elegance. I completely buy what you're saying, because that's the intent of the culture. And I think it does, and Patricia was saying before, we somehow always wind up coming back to culture and values in this conversation. I think the Chinese government has a fine appreciation of the vulnerabilities that are introduced by a decentralized architecture. And they, as a result, have literally millions of people employed to police the Great Firewall. This is, so, the aspect of, desiring to manage or be in part of this conversation is clearly still within the government's permit. They remit. They are part of it. But I think there's an ingoing hypothesis that the noble lie of Chinese government is the perfectibility of governance. It is saying that the quality of a society is indicated by the quality of its governance, because the governance says something about the capacity of the society to regulate itself. And as a result, when things are going wrong in society, it's something that governance should be held directly to account for. And if they go really wrong, then the governance has lost the mandate of heaven and will fall. And that has been how dynasties changed in China. So I think there's a great sort of a sense of, we actually have, as governance, no choice but to, A, fulfill the mandate, which is to, serve the people and sort of achieve greater heights of society. And if we fail to do that, then it's on us. And there isn't anyone else who's going to be accountable for this. There isn't any external force, for that matter. There isn't any internal force, because governance is in China is all about the whole of society, not about factions within society. Governance is there to represent all of it. So as a result, we will see and have seen a massive step up in security technology, and that I think you will see great innovations in security. And there's a reason why facial recognition is very high on the list of the Chinese government's employment of AI, and I can go on in terms of quantum and Bitcoin and all and crypto. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the deal of being in the Chinese government. So you have to do that.
No more jaywalking in China
more
for
jaywalking.
me. Professor
Right.
Lemos.
So first of all, thank you for two excellent presentations. I would like to go back to the metaphysics, actually. So in the following sense, I think China has been really successful in building overarching visions as well, not only in terms of technology as applied, but also in science fiction by the work of Liu Cixin, and also philosophically by the work of Yu Hui and others. And I think they have like a very interesting points in terms of how we should see the world in itself. So when I see the description of your view of education and the role of technology, my question for you is, aren't we delegating to machines what should be in the hands of the demons, maybe? Or aren't we missing the cosmos in this process?
Wonderful. So this diagram actually was literally designed to talk about it. So this focus is so-called computational thinking. In computational thinking, or in computing science, there are three basic foundational metrics or measurement types. First one is time, so it takes a lot of time to calculate something. Second one is space, storage space, so you need big hard drive space, or information accounts, right? You have many, many numbers. And the third one is called uncertainty. On the other hand, the Maxwell demons. So both three things are resources. So it turns out using Oracle to predict something is not something non-scientific. Oracle is a way to use randomness to test something when you couldn't come up with a quick procedure. On the other hand, the notion of computational thinking, not necessarily computing science, is actually knowing what kind of resources you have available to set up your boundary, to do things mechanically. Therefore, this so-called measurable time and space becomes your available resource to do trials and errors so that you roughly have a boundary, some machinery to do things up to some level of so-called satisfaction or some kind of reliability. At the same time, you still have remaining uncertainty, then you can use randomness to check. That's where Maxwell demons comes in. So it turns out it is a way to very systematically, as Deng Xiaoping once said, touching the stones to get through the river, is really meaning that you couldn't see it. Therefore, you have to use your other sensory and with lower resolution. So this is actually a very comprehensive way to look at how to go through a very sophisticated policymaking process.
Thank you. Those are wonderful remarks. I think we're out of town, but I'd like to give Jonathan a chance to, if you have any concluding observation to offer, because I think that was a wonderful framing.
No, I think that was great, and so no, I'm just very happy that we have this chance to this forum to have these conversations across different cultures, and I'm sure that we will come to opportunities to work together. I mean, that's the other famous Chinese saying is to truth from facts, 实事求是. So I mean, as we go forward and we discover what are the good things and what are the bad things about this, we will all have opportunities to collaborate and improve the quality of the conversation.
Thank you so much. I think we didn't get too specific in this discussion on where China and Brazil might collaborate, or where the United States or where the world can collaborate with these changes occurring in both China and Brazil. But somehow today I hope we'll weave that into the course of our conversation. Please join me in thanking our terrific speakers.